Mount Albert is a prominent landform located on the southern coastline of Wellington. It is a spur of Mount Victoria that sits 4 kilometres south, and the two are connected by a ridgeline. The ecosystem we are analysing today is the coastal forest, located on the east side of Mount Albert, facing Lyell Bay. For centuries, the land and its plants have weathered salt winds and storms, but now the heavy impact of human pressures have tested its limits. Weeds strangle its soil, invasive species run wild, but still, it's fighting back. Over the next 10 minutes, we'll explore how this ecosystem functions, how humans have altered it, and why its survival matters.
It's hard to imagine standing here that lowland Wellington was once covered in towering forest that was largely composed of podocarp and broadleaf species. Tawa and kohe formed a dense canopy, and below, a carpet of ferns and mosses, but only a few ancient survivors remain. There are several native and endemic species found on our site as shown. Many of these plants were essential to moticulture and cultivation, but colonization has had a huge impact on it. Clearance for timber milling, agriculture, roads, and developments has transformed the land greatly. But if you look closely, you can still find the old forest canopy covered in whispers. Mapu, toa, kohe. Endemic trees like ngayo, buhutukawa, and karaka cling here, but for how long? In this video, we get a taste of what the old forest would have looked like on the site. Here, the water tower acts as a protective barrier to the elements, much like how the primary forest would have. In this niche, wacky tree ferns can grow undamaged, epiphytes grow on rocks, and forest plants like kawakawa can grow. The humidity is higher, and the temperature is much cooler, offering up a very different looking and feeling ecosystem to what Mount Albert is now.
The unique landform, hydrology, and wind patterns on Mount Albert control the ecosystem's life. The steep cliff-like terrain and strong salt winds impact the type of plants found in the ecosystem. At the top of the hill, where wind is the strongest, plants have dug roots deep into the ground as an anchoring mechanism against the wind. As you venture further down the hill, the noticeable effects of salt spray on plants can be seen. Plants have been growing sideways on the small cliffs, with their root systems hugging the ground to avoid salt spray. The landform also creates niches on the site. In this video, you can see the landform blocking the southerly wind, allowing plants like the feke, tree fern, which are typically intolerant to coastal wind, to grow, and native trees to grow taller than anywhere else on the site. Humans have transformed this landform greatly, with the installation of a water tank and other buildings at the top of the hill, paths and tracks winding throughout the mountain, and roads lining the base of it. Human interference with the land has significantly impacted the hydrology, soil retention, and growth of plants. Historically, rainwater would flow naturally down the slope of the hill, with plants and trees collecting the water as it flowed past. Now, paths and tracks have caused a concentrated water flow, resulting in stunting plant growth in some areas up the top of the hill, and plants near the base of the hill are flooded with water. Soil erosion has seen a spike in invasive plants and weeds taking over the natural landscape and eradicating pre-existing plants in its path. The forest floor on the northeastern side of the hill was damp and moist, showing water retention within the soil. However, the current state of the ecosystem means that the water flows straight off and down the hill. A noticeable sight on Mount Albert was the native plant growth in disturbed areas. There were some native species like totara and kohuhu which have grown readily in the disturbed areas where land has been cleared. This was seen often throughout our visit to the site. The noticeable impacts on the landform and hydrology created by humans has caused the ecosystem to adapt and suffer, resulting in plant species being completely wiped out from the area. The relationship between the hydrology and the landform isn't passive. It's a dialogue between them, and humans rewrote that script.
What makes a coastal forest is salt spray and how far it goes. Salt spray is natural here, but in the 20s and 30s, Wellington decided to remove the Lyell Bay sand dunes on a massive scale, and the math is simple. Lost dunes equal more salt reaching the forest, and it does not help at all that the hill's slope funnels salt spray like a weapon through accelerated wind. We see the impacts of salt spray on this coastal forest through the leaves. Look at this wind tunneling path, and beside this path are plants with leaf burn, stunted growth, and salt pruning or wind sheared branches. impacts which leaves plants vulnerable to diseases. Natives like Taupata and Huru whenua evolved armor with waxy, tough leaves. These glossy leaves allow them to grow in these coastal conditions. The outer layer protects it and allows salty water to wash off the leaf rather than soak into it. By contrast, the soft leaf of the Rangiora plant, aka Bushman's toilet paper, does not have this trait. Here, this plant can only be round under a niche deep canopy where it is protected from the salt spray. Human actions tip the balance. Now, even the survivors are struggling.
Shown here are all the introduced species found through fieldwork. Many invasive plants were simply just garden escapees. Most of them were shipped over to New Zealand because they were really attractive and looked good in gardens. Things like English ivy, Vetiza japonica, eucalyptus, and even gorse was used. However, most people did not know how these plants would respond and grow in New Zealand's climate. Meet the forest's worst roommate, Tradescantia or Wandering Willy. It's not just invading, it's erasing. I'm sure settlers thought this would look lovely in a domestic garden, but now this one plant smothers everything, from seedlings, insects, and even the soil's own breath. See this cutting? Even leaving this one little bit on the ground will grow. This is a hyper-vigorous grower, but it doesn't destroy its native ecosystem because there is a beetle which eats the new shoots, the seeds, and the flowers in an equally hyper-vigorous manner. In New Zealand, our climate's too cold to harbour such beetles. As a result, the Tradescantia is allowed to grow hyper-vigorously without restraints. However, deforestation was the first step that had this cascading effect, changing the entire ecosystem. Primary forest canopy protected the soil and new native plants from the elements. Without this canopy, the sun dries out the soil, wind breaks new shoots, blows over trees, and blows away the dry soil, leaving only clay and rock behind. This new landscape favors short shrubby weeds such as gorse, blackberry, ivy, and fennel to grow as they can tolerate these conditions. Even our non-Welly native Karo tree has the ability to create monocultures in this new ecosystem. Wellington's high-speed winds would also blow away all of these weed seeds around far and wide, especially with old man's beard and the sycamore helicopter seeds, which have evolved to spread with the wind. Deforestation disrupted the relationship between birds, insects, plants, trees, and fungi. Old trees like the totara and rimu provided crucial shelter and nesting sites for birds, while leaf litter and organic matter was a wonderland for insects and fungi. With these removed, so too was the loss of critical habitat fauna. In these new dry and exposed ecosystem, fungi can't stay damp and cold to break down organic matter. It's only within these niche microclimates on this site where this can occur. Mount Albert is now in a critical state where invasive weeds have almost taken over. If nothing is done, the inevitable consequence will be the domination of invasive weeds. Volunteers have cleared some areas, like in this area, which used to be completely covered in blackberry, but now is full of native plants like harakeke and grasses. And in this other area, the floors have been cleared of Tradescantia, allowing natives to fill in the forest floor and also take up the sunlight which peeks through the canopy. Locals are even tackling Pinus radiata, a common wood used in our building. This tree creates monocultures as the pine needles fall on the floor and change the acidity of the soil, blocking out competition. Here, they ring bark it at the base and poison it. Aside from the weeds, the unpredictable nature of climate change is a real concern. With more frequent storms, droughts, and temperature fluctuations, planting the exact same historic natives may not be the correct solution. This makes planting for the future tricky, particularly for those plants which are delicate to things like drought. The key to the ecosystem's survival and revival is through education and raising awareness. Protecting this forest isn't charity. It's kaitiatikanga. The future of Mount Albert's ecosystem hinges on the active conservation and community involvement. Mount Albert holds a special place in my heart. I've lived here my entire life, and I've gone for countless runs throughout the hills, sat at the top of the hill to enjoy the view. And when times get tough, I'll just sit amongst the trees and reflect and meditate. The demise of this ecosystem would be a tragedy, one filled with regret, wondering what could have been if we'd just taken care of the thing that we loved.
I mean, before this project, I've only ever visited Wellington Zoo, just down the slope from here. I love the greenery and the sound of the birds, but standing here in Mount Albert for the first time and seeing how much has been lost, it's different. And it's beautiful, but so fragile. And I hope more people discover this place and become more aware of its issues, not just as a backdrop to the zoo, but as something worth protecting for locals and visitors alike.
Living so close to Mount Albert, I had never been there, but after walking through during this project and other times by myself, I've realized the significant impact on the ecosystem that us humans have created. It's sad to see such a beautiful coastal forest being neglected in the invasion of exotic species invading the landscape. It has beautiful views and an amazing history, and we need to take care of it.